The dim glow of a solitary bedside lamp flickered softly, casting long, shifting shadows across the worn wooden floorboards of my childhood room. I sat cross-legged on the edge of my bed, my fingers nervously tracing the faded pattern of the blanket, feeling the roughness beneath my fingertips as if grounding me in the moment. The air was thick with a strange mixture of nostalgia and unease, each breath heavy with unspoken truths I had long suppressed. I could still see her, Lily, bouncing into the room, her laughter echoing like a bell that refused to fade, her bright eyes sparkling with confidence as she teased me about my quietness. "You're so invisible, Elena," she'd sneer, tossing her hair over her shoulder, the mockery sharp as a dagger. I remember the way my stomach clenched when I'd hear her voice, so confident, so dismissive, while I sat there, pretending to be indifferent, hiding the shards of jealousy that cut deeper with each passing day. There was a time I thought it was just sibling rivalry, an innocent game of who was loved more. But as I sit here now, in the darkness, I realize how much I had been waiting for a reason. A way to make her see me, to tear her down just as she did to me. It was never about her, I tell myself, but about the emptiness I felt when I looked in the mirror and saw only the ghost of my own shadow. I remember the petty fights over trivial things. Who got the last cookie? Who scraped their knee first? Who was more popular at school? And how each tiny grievance festered inside me, twisting into something darker. I'd watch her from behind closed doors, her carefree laughter echoing through the walls. And I'd think, if I could just make her hurt like I do inside, maybe she'd finally notice me. That thought planted itself deep in my mind, growing into a sick fixation I couldn't shake. I recall the night I first brought home a broken glass shard, the coldness of the smooth surface against my palm, the way my heart pounded with a strange mixture of dread and exhilaration. It was a secret I kept hidden in the corners of my mind, until that day, when the petty quarrel erupted over something insignificant, and I saw my chance. Lily had called me a nobody, a ghost in her perfect world, and in that moment something dark awoke within me. I remember whispering to myself, "This is justice," as I watched her smile fade, her eyes widening in confusion and fear. I felt a strange rush, a twisted sense of power, as if I finally had control over the chaos inside me, over her obliviousness. And so, I pressed the shards of glass into her trembling lips, watching her struggle, feeling her tears and the sting of her panic as she swallowed. I heard her choking, saw the blood bubble up, and felt my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. For a fleeting second, I believed I had done something necessary, something that would finally make her see me. But as she collapsed, trembling and gasping, I knew, deep down, that I had crossed a line. That moment marked the beginning of my silent war with her, a battle built on petty jealousy, twisted justice, and a darkness I would carry forever. Sitting there now, in the quiet of my room, I realized how easy it was to tip into that abyss, how I had always been teetering on the edge, waiting for the right, or wrong, moment to unleash the storm I had kept buried deep inside. The evening sun cast long, golden shadows across the polished oak table in our dining room, where the familiar warmth of family life cloaked beneath an uneasy silence. Lily sat at the head, her laughter ringing effortlessly, as she twirled a strand of her chestnut hair, her eyes bright with the easy joy of being the center of attention. She tossed a playful tease at our father, who chuckled and ruffled her hair without a hint of annoyance, while my mother shook her head with a soft, indulgent smile. I sat across from them, clutching my fork tightly, feeling the weight of every glance come down on me like a stone. Lily's voice dripped with carefree confidence as she recounted an embarrassing story from school, her laughter bubbling out in that carefree, infectious way that had always come so naturally to her. I forced a smile, my cheeks aching from the effort, as if my face was being pulled apart by invisible strings. Inside, a storm churned. Bitterness, resentment, and the quiet ache of invisibility gnawed at my insides. I watched her, so radiant and oblivious, and felt an almost violent urge to tear away her veneer of happiness. My eyes flicked to the wineglass beside her, its crystal surface catching the light, reminding me of the sharp shards I had hidden earlier, reminders of the chaos I had contemplated, the darkness I carried within. The conversation flowed on, superficial and harmless on the surface. But beneath it, my mind spun with poisonous thoughts. Why was she so effortlessly loved? Why did they always praise her when I was left in shadows, silent, unseen? The smell of roasted chicken mingled with the faint scent of fresh herbs. But all I could taste was the bitterness swelling in my throat. I clenched my fists beneath the table, wishing I could disappear into the fabric of the chair, wishing I could erase the overwhelming sense that I was the outsider, the ghost in my own family. Lily's peals of laughter pierced through my consciousness again, each note a cruel reminder of her unearned happiness. I watched her throw a glance at our mother, smirking as she recounted a joke only she found amusing, while I sat silently, feeling my heartbeat accelerate as the hollow ache of jealousy deepened. The moment stretched, fragile and poisonous, as I stared at her bright face, the image of everything I was not. Popular, adored, free from shadows. A cold, dark thought crept into my mind. This imbalance, this favoritism, was the root of everything wrong. And in that moment, as the room hummed with the sound of Lily's laughter and the clink of silverware, I understood that I could no longer sit quietly. Something inside me shifted. A silent promise that I would find a way to make her see the darkness she never noticed. Something that would ultimately change us forever. The memory surfaces like a dark tide, rolling over me with brutal clarity. How it all began with that petty argument over Jason. Lily had brushed me off in front of her friends, laughing as she threw her head back, eyes sparkling with that unmistakable arrogance she always carried. "It's not your business, Elena," she sneered, her voice dripping with contempt, as she dismissively waved away my pathetic attempt to defend myself. I remember feeling my stomach tighten, a bitter taste rising in my throat, one I couldn't quite swallow. She had always been the star, the one everyone adored, while I was left to drown in shadows, unnoticed and forgotten, even in my own family. That day, her words cut deeper than any physical wound. They echoed in my mind long after, fueling a fire of jealousy I couldn't contain. I watched her go, her laughter ringing in my ears, each note a sharp blade stabbing into my fragile ego. I clenched my fists and stared after her, trembling with a mixture of rage and helplessness, the kind that makes your vision blur and your thoughts spiral. As she disappeared into the crowd, I found myself alone in my room, trembling with a new, dark resolve. That petty quarrel, so trivial to anyone else, became the seed of something far more sinister. I began to scheme in secret, my mind racing with images of retribution, of making her see the darkness she so carelessly dismissed. I knew, with a strange cold certainty, that I had to punish her for dismissing my feelings, for treating me like invisible trash. The plan came together in my mind like a twisted masterpiece, subtle, cruel, untraceable. I would show her, in the most visceral way possible, that beneath her bright, carefree exterior lurked a vulnerability she'd never acknowledge. And so, in that quiet storm of jealousy and humiliation, I began to plot my silent, deadly act, one that would forever change us both, sealing our fates in a web of guilt and horror I could never fully escape. That night, as shadows crept across my room, I slipped out of bed with a trembling breath, my heart pounding like a trapped animal. The house was silent, save for the faint hum of the distant television, and I moved with a cautious, almost ritualistic purpose. I tiptoed down the dim hall, my footsteps muffled by the worn carpet, until I reached the bathroom door. With shaky hands, I pushed it open, the cool air brushing against my skin as I stepped inside. The mirror above the sink was shattered, fragments of glass shimmering like tiny deadly stars. I knelt carefully on the cold tiles, my fingers trembling as I reached for the broken pieces, each one sharp and cold to the touch. I felt a strange mix of fear and obsession, like I was gathering a weapon for a silent war. The jagged edges caught the weak light, reflecting fractured images of my face. Haunted, desperate, I pressed the shards into my palm, whispering to myself, "This is justice." Though my voice cracked under the weight of my own insanity, I knew I couldn't let her see what I was doing. Not yet. Not even in my mind. Quietly, I slid the glass into a small, hidden bag, feeling its dangerous weight, a tangible symbol of my resolve. Every step I took back through the dark hall was filled with a strange calm, like I was preparing for something inevitable, something that would finally make her understand the pain I'd carried all these years. Just a petty quarrel, I told myself, but beneath that lies something much darker. As I closed the bathroom door behind me, I looked back once, eyes flickering with a cold resolve. Tomorrow I would do what I believed was just, nothing less than punishment for her arrogance and dismissiveness. My trembling hands clutched the bag tightly as I retreated into the shadows, my mind racing with twisted clarity. This was the only way to make her see, to make her feel the same helplessness I'd felt. And in that moment I knew there was no turning back now. A quiet, deadly resolve settled over me as I slipped my hand into my pocket, feeling the tiny, jagged pieces of glass I had carefully concealed there earlier that day. The cool, rough edges pressed against my fingertips, a sinister reminder of what I was about to do. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from fear but from a twisted sense of purpose, as if orchestrating a cruel lesson. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, trying to steady my trembling hands, whispering to myself, "This is justice. She needs to understand what it feels like, what I've felt for years." The memory of her dismissive laughter, her mocking tone when she brushed off my feelings, flared in my mind like a blazing fire. "She's just a stupid brat," I muttered under my breath, voice trembling with a mix of hatred and desperation. I moved quietly through the house, my footsteps soundless on the cold wooden floor, heart pounding in rhythm with my racing thoughts. I pictured her innocent face, the way she'd smile so confidently, oblivious to the darkness brewing inside me. I saw her sitting at the kitchen table, flicking her hair back, totally unaware of the tiny shards I had hidden in my palm, waiting for the perfect moment. I remembered what I told myself. It's just a lesson, a punishment for her arrogance. I had convinced myself that forcing her to eat glass was a necessary act of retribution, a way to make her feel the helplessness she'd always dismissed in me. I had spent hours meticulously breaking the glass into minuscule, almost invisible fragments, tucking them into a napkin, then slipping them into my pocket like poisoned seeds. Now, I was watching her, her carefree demeanor making my stomach twist, but I clung to my justification. "She needs to see what she's doing," I repeated softly, almost as a mantra, my eyes darting to the door of her room. I could hear her humming in the other part of the house, her voice light and unaware, and I felt a sickening mix of anticipation and dread. This wasn't about anger. It was about control, about the power to make her feel the pain I'd kept bottled up inside for so long. I clenched my fists around the small bag of glass, feeling its rough edges bite into my palms, and whispered, "Tonight, she'll learn her lesson." My mind raced with visions of her choking on the shards, her eyes wide with shock, and an icy wave of satisfaction washed over me. I told myself it would be temporary, that in some distorted way, I was doing what was necessary, what justice demanded. As I stepped closer to her door, the weight of my decision pressed down on me heavier than ever, a terrible truth I could no longer deny, yet refused to face. I knew once I crossed this line, there was no turning back. "But still," I whispered again, "she needs to feel what I felt." as I lifted the edge of the door, my hand trembling. The tiny, dangerous pieces hidden in my pocket like a secret weapon. I approached Lily in the kitchen, her laughter spilling over the clatter of dishes and the warm hum of the home, her eyes bright with that careless innocence I once craved but now found revolting. She was leaning against the counter, flipping through her phone, oblivious to the dark storm gathering inside me. I forced a gentle smile, the kind I practiced in secret, and reached out softly. "Hey, do you want a snack?" I asked, my voice soothing but with an unnatural calm that betrayed my tremor beneath the surface. Lily looked up, eyes sparkling with trust, and nodded eagerly. "Sure! Thanks, Elena." Her voice was light, unaware of the blade I had hidden in my pocket. Small shards of glass, sharp and cold, that I'd slipped into the corner of a plastic bag earlier, hidden from sight but burning in my mind. I watched her take a sip from her glass of juice, her lips curling around the straw with innocent pleasure, as I leaned closer, pretending to fuss over her. "Here, try this," I murmured, voice smooth as silk, my fingers trembling faintly as I added a tiny piece of glass into her drink, my eyes flickering with a sinister gleam. I kept my expression neutral, a mask of concern masking the chaos inside. "It's just a little something I read about. Some weird thing about making flavors stronger." Her smile widened, and she lifted her glass again, eager to taste what I'd given her, oblivious to the tiny, dangerous cut of glass now mingling with her drink. I watched her take the first sip, a flicker of satisfaction rushing through me as she swallowed, her face still glowing with happiness. I felt the sick thrill of control, the subtle power of her vulnerability, and I whispered softly, "Enjoy it, Lily. You deserve a little surprise." My heart pounded with a mixture of anticipation and dread, knowing that tonight I was playing with fire, and once she drank that glass, there was no turning back from the darkness I had willingly unleashed. Narrative development following. Elena vividly recalls Lily's initial confusion and subsequent pain as she begins to choke, her sister's face twisting with shock and agony, while Elena watches silently, her heart pounding with a twisted sense of power and guilt suppressed beneath her facade. The story continues exploring the central themes of the original prompt with unique characters and engaging situations that keep the reader interested in the development of events and conflicts presented in a rich and detailed manner. Lily's trembling figure crumpled onto the cold, tiled floor, clutching her stomach as if a sudden savage pain had seized her from within, her face contorted in shock, eyes wide with terror, lips trembling as she tried to gasp for breath. But her words came out garbled, choked and frantic. She writhed, whimpering helplessly, as her body spasmed beneath her. I stood a few feet away, my heart pounding with a chaotic mix of adrenaline and dread, my hands trembling slightly as I watched her struggle. In a swift, practiced motion, I crouched down, placing a soothing hand on her damp hair, voice trembling but controlled. "Lily, stay with me. It's going to be okay," I whispered, trying to sound reassuring, even as my mind spun with fear and excitement. My eyes darted toward the door, then back to her frantic face. "Somebody call 911, I yelled loudly, my voice cracking just enough to sound urgent but not suspicious. My pulse thudded loudly in my ears as I hurriedly checked her pupils, which were dilated and unfocused, her body trembling uncontrollably. I gently shook her shoulder, whispering softly, Hold on. Help is coming." I knew I had to keep her calm, to mask the chaos roiling inside me. As I pressed my phone to my ear, I cast a quick glance at her red-streaked face, mumbling a fabricated story to the dispatcher. "My sister just suddenly collapsed. She's been complaining about stomach pain, but I didn't think it was this bad. It's like she's been poisoned or something. Please, hurry." I felt an icy thrill as I watched her eyes flutter, her body limp, but still trembling. The room was thick with silence, broken only by her shallow, agonized breaths and the distant sound of sirens approaching. I moved closer, pretending to be gentle, whispering soothing lies as I observed her fragile, broken form, every second stretched painfully long, her face twisting in pain, her fingers clutching at her stomach, as if trying to hold herself together, her eyelids fluttering like a dying butterfly. I felt a perverse sense of relief, knowing I had constructed an illusion of innocence, that I could manipulate the scene to hide what I had done. My voice softened, trembling with a mixture of guilt and satisfaction, as I continued to speak to the dispatcher, my words carefully chosen to paint her suffering as an accident, a tragic, unforeseen event. I watched her collapse further, her body curling instinctively, desperately trying to fend off the unseen torment inside. And in that moment, as I stood over her, I knew that the darkness I had unleashed was now out of my control, spiraling into a nightmare I had willingly created, one that would haunt me long after the sirens faded into the distance. I found myself in a twisted limbo, caught between the suffocating weight of my guilt and the fragile veneer of denial I desperately clung to. Every glance into a mirror became a battleground, my reflection warping, flickering, as if the glass itself betrayed me. In those moments, Lily's face would surge from the depths of my mind or appear ghostly in the cracked surface, her eyes hollow and accusing, whispering venomous truths I refused to accept. "You lied," she hissed softly, her voice echoing with a chilling serenity that made my skin crawl. I would shrink back, trembling, clutching at the edges of the sink, trying to drown out her voice that seemed to seep from every corner, every shadow dancing along the walls. "You killed me." Lily's voice would murmur again, sharper, more insistent, while I caught fleeting glimpses of her, her tear-streaked face twisted in pain, her lips trembling as she desperately begged for mercy. My mind played cruel tricks, blurring her features with reflections of myself, making me question whether I was staring at her or some warped version of my own conscience. Then there was her whisper, softer now, almost a caress. "Why did you do it?" The echo haunted me, bouncing in endless loops, each time more accusatory, more unbearable. I would hear her voice when I closed my eyes, calling my name, accusing me of betrayal, of cowardice, of unleashing a darkness I could neither deny nor escape. Sometimes I'd catch her ghostly face in the rain-slicked window, staring back at me with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through my soul, demanding answers I never had. Other times I'd see her reflection in the mirror, her lips moving silently, an unspoken plea, while my own lips trembled, trembling with the weight of a confession I was too terrified to speak aloud. I'd whisper to myself, "It's just my imagination." But her voice persisted, relentless, echoing through the hollow chambers of my mind. I could feel her presence in every room, her ghostly whispers teasing my sanity, her face flickering in the flickering candlelight, her eyes burning holes into my conscience. Every sigh I took felt like a betrayal, a reminder that the monster I had become couldn't be contained, that her ghost was forever etched into the fabric of my fractured psyche. I knew that if I looked too long, she would be there, her spectral silhouette hovering just beyond the reach of reality, whispering accusations I'd never be able to silence. And so I sank further into this dark abyss, trembling, lost in a mire of hallucinations and guilt, unable to distinguish between what I had done and what I was merely imagining. As I sit alone in the dim glow of the flickering candle, my trembling voice finally escapes my lips, layered with a mixture of remorse and icy justification. "It was her," I whisper hoarsely, voice barely audible over the pounding of my own heart. Lily was relentless. She never stopped. She mocked me, pushed me to the edge, and I couldn't take it anymore. I clutch my knees tightly, eyes blinking rapidly as my mind rewinds to the countless silent insults, the sneers behind my back, the way she'd laugh when I stumbled, as if I was nothing but a joke to her. I stroked the rough scars on my palms, remembering how helpless I'd felt, how every cruel word she spat was like a shard slicing through my fragile veneer. My fingers tremble as I recall the day I found the glass shards hidden beneath my bed, their cold edges whispering promises of release. In my mind, I argue that I did what I had to. Self-defense, I tell myself. A way to protect what little dignity I had left. I see her standing there, her eyes gleaming with condescension, taunting me. You're nothing, Elena. Always will be. Her voice echoes in my head, mocking, suffocating. I can't help but picture her smirking, her silhouette towering over me as I grasped the glass, trembling but determined. I needed to teach her a lesson, I mutter, voice cracking. She made me feel so small, so worthless. I couldn't let her win anymore. If I didn't do this, I'd be erased, swallowed by her cruelty. My eyes dart around the room, searching for some shred of reason, some justification that could absolve me of what I'd done. I tell myself it was protection, my way of fighting back against her relentless torment. I see her face distorted in my mind's eye, her lips curling into that smug grin, daring me to act, daring me to break. And I did. I forced her to eat the shards, convincing myself it was a lesson, a punishment for her cruelty. A way to finally make her see the pain she caused me. I cling to this justification, desperately trying to silence the voice inside that screams otherwise, trying to convince myself that I was cornered, that I was only defending myself from the relentless, cutting cruelty that Lily had always wielded like a weapon. The guilt is there, lurking in the shadows. But I push it down, buried beneath the cold rationale I've crafted. It was her or me. That's all I tell myself now, while the darkness swirls deeper, threatening to drown me in the truth I refuse to face. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my trembling hands as I stared at the chaos I had left behind. The room was a mess, scattered shards of glass glinting like tiny knives against the floor, a crimson streak running across the linoleum. I knew I had to cover my tracks, to make it look like an accident. My pulse pounded loudly in my ears as I hurriedly pushed furniture aside, knocking over a lamp to obscure any footprints. I grabbed Lily's favorite blanket, carefully draping it over her lifeless body, as if shielding her from the cruel truth. My mind raced, frantic to piece together a convincing story. I had to convince my parents she slipped and fell. I remembered my own trembling voice as I dialed their numbers, feigning calm but failing miserably. Mom, Dad? Lily's hurt. She fell in the kitchen. I think she hit her head. She's bleeding. I think she's unconscious. My voice cracked, betraying the panic I desperately tried to suppress. I watched through the window as they rushed home, my stomach twisting with guilt and fear. But beneath that, an ominous sensation crept, the feeling that I wasn't quite finished, that the darkness inside me was still lurking, waiting to surface again. As they burst through the door, I plastered a worried expression on my face, clutching Lily's cold hand, whispering hollow reassurances. Inside, my mind was a storm of paranoia, sensing that my guilt was seeping into every corner of my consciousness. Every glance, every trembling breath felt like a threat, reminding me that I had crossed a line from which there was no return. I kept telling myself I'd done what I had to do, that her death was her fault, that I was innocent. But the shadows in my mind whispered otherwise. Behind my trembling facade, I saw flashes of Lily's face, her eyes wide with shock, her lips parted in a silent scream. And I knew, somehow, that no matter how carefully I staged the scene, the truth would never be fully buried. The guilt clawed at my insides, threatening to break free, to expose the darkness that I had desperately tried to hide. And as my parents shielded Lily's body with trembling hands, I felt the weight of my secret pressing down on me, heavier than any lie I could tell. The paranoia grew stronger, a relentless whisper echoing in my mind. They'll see through you, Elena. They'll see what you've done. Every night, I replay that horrifying scene in my mind, a sick obsession that refuses to fade. I lie in my dimly lit room, the air thick with the scent of cold sweat and stale regret, clutching my pillow as if it could somehow absorb the weight of my confession. I see her again. Lily's face contorted in pain, eyes wide with shock, her trembling lips trying to scream, but no sound escapes. I remember the way she looked at me after swallowing the shards, her trembling hands clawing at her throat, her desperate, helpless gaze locking onto mine. An unspoken plea I would never answer. I replay the moment I forced her to eat the glass, how her tears mixed with the blood on her lips, the sickening crunch echoing in my ears. I whispered to myself, "It's your fault. You did this." But my voice is hollow, distant, an echo of the girl I once was. I watch her struggle in my mind's eye, her body racked with pain, every gasp a reminder of my cruelty. I replay the scene endlessly, as if by doing so I can somehow claim control over it, as if confronting it head-on might make it less real. Yet I maintain my outward composure during the day. I act indifferent, calm as a stone, hiding the tempest raging inside. I hold my face still when my parents ask about Lily's condition, my voice steady and emotionless. She's sleeping now. She'll be okay. But behind my calculated smile I am unraveling, haunted by the unrelenting ghost of what I've done. I see their concern flicker in their eyes, my mother's trembling hands, my father's worried, furrowed brow, and I feel a flicker of panic that they might someday see through my mask. Deep down, I know I am only fooling myself, constructing a fortress of lies while the guilt festers in the shadows of my mind. When the house falls silent, I sit in the darkness, eyes fixated on the ceiling, replaying her suffering like a sick lullaby. I imagine her voice whispering from the depths of my conscience, "Why did you do this?" And I stiffen, fighting the urge to drown in the guilt, to confess everything I've buried deep inside. But I am trapped in this obsessive loop, haunted by the image of her broken face, convinced that if I forget or suppress it, I might escape the truth. Yet every night, the memories claw their way back, relentless and insistent, forcing me to relive my horror. Each replay a brutal reminder of the darkness I chose to hide behind my calm facade. In the quiet darkness of my room, the weight of my secrets presses heavily on my chest, and I reach for my phone, trembling fingers fumbling with the fragile device before I press record. The room is silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner and my own ragged breathing. I stare into the camera lens, my eyes glassy, yet determined, and begin to speak in a voice that is both hollow and resolute. This is the truth I've kept buried for so long. I whisper, voice trembling with the weight of my own confession. I made my sister eat glass. My words hang in the air, raw and trembling, as I recount every detail with ruthless clarity. How I snuck shards into her food, how her desperate, gagging cries echoed in my mind long after she collapsed on the floor, blood seeping into the tiles where I had forced her to swallow those deadly fragments. I watch my reflection flicker on the screen, eyes dark with guilt and a strange sense of relief, believing that speaking aloud, recording this moment, might somehow free me from the torment that's haunted me since that terrible day. I did it because I was jealous, I admit softly, voice thick with emotion. Because she was everything I wasn't. Beautiful, popular, loved. And I hated her for that. I pause, my fingers tightening around the phone as memories surge unbidden. Her trembling hands, her pleading eyes, the horrifying crunch of glass breaking inside her mouth. I see her slipping away, her face distorted in pain, and I press stop, breaths ragged, trembling, knowing that this recording is my final act of confession, my attempt to cast my soul into the open. But as I stare at the frozen image on the screen, a cold dread creeps over me. What if someone finds this? What if my words are never enough? I've convinced myself that this tape will absolve me, that by voicing my darkest deed into the void, I can silence the ghosts that haunt me. Yet, instead of peace, I feel only a deeper sense of dread unraveling within, an endless loop of guilt, fear, and the terrible realization that my truth, once spoken, can never be unspoken. I clutched the phone to my chest, whispering softly into the night. Maybe now I can finally be free, but in the shadows, I know that the real nightmare is just beginning. The harsh glow of the kitchen light cast long shadows across the worn wooden table as my parents' eyes flickered with concern, their voices low but edged with worry. "Elena, honey, you haven't been yourself lately," Mom murmured, her brow furrowed as she glanced at me with a mixture of confusion and quiet accusation. Dad's voice, steady yet tentative, cut through the tense silence. "Are you okay? You've been so distant, so withdrawn." I forced a weak smile, trying to appear composed, but my heart pounded against my ribs like a wounded animal. My hands trembled uncontrollably, clutching the edge of the chair as if anchoring myself to sanity. Inside, panic surged, a cold, numbing dread that made my skin crawl. I saw her, Lily's face, reflected obsessively in the gleam of the polished silverware, the way her eyes had once sparkled with innocence, now twisted into a ghostly mask, haunting every mirror in my mind. Every glance I took, every surface I looked into, seemed to warp and flicker with her image, her accusing stare drilling into my soul. "What's wrong, Elena?" Mom's voice softened, tinged with genuine concern. But to me it sounded distant, like a whisper from another world. I wanted to scream, to tell them everything. The truth that had been festering inside me, a poison I tried to drown in silence. Instead, I swallowed hard, forcing words I didn't truly believe into my throat. "I'm fine," I whispered, voice trembling. Yet the lie felt hollow as a razor's edge. The room grew colder, shadows deepening as my mind spun chaotically. I could feel her, Lily, lurking in the corners of my vision, her face stretching into grotesque mockery every time I dared to look away. My pulse hammered so loudly I feared it would betray me, revealing the darkness I carried. In that moment, I knew my secret was slipping free of its cage. The facade of normalcy was cracking, and soon, the truth would shatter everything I'd tried to hide. A tear slipped unbidden down my cheek as I desperately clung to the illusion of control, praying they wouldn't see what I had done, what I was capable of. But inside, my mind was unraveling, a frantic voice screaming, "They suspect, they know, and soon all will be revealed." The mirror before me suddenly rippled like disturbed water, and through its shimmering surface, Lily's face emerged, her eyes wide and hollow, filled with an unearthly glow that chilled me to the bone. Her lips parted, but instead of speech, a rasping, guttural voice spilled into the silence, echoing in my mind as if summoned from the depths of some nightmare. "You made me eat glass," she hissed, each word dripping with venom, her voice distorted and crackling, like broken glass itself. "Do you think you can hide from what you did? Do you think forgiveness will ever find you?" Her face twisted in a grotesque mask of betrayal and fury as she reached out with trembling, spectral hands that seemed to seep from the mirror's edge, grasping at my shoulders. I recoiled instinctively, but her voice grew louder and more insistent, reverberating through my skull, filling my ears with the sound of shattering bones and splintered screams. "You lied. You hurt me. And now I'm here to make you see. The truth you buried deep inside, the darkness you refused to face." The room spiraled into chaos, walls melting into black ink, shadows swirling like whirlpools of despair, while Lily's face pressed closer, her eyes burning with an otherworldly fury. "You can't run from me," she whispered cruelly, her voice now a rasping echo. "Because I am what you've become. Your conscience, your nightmare, your punishment. And soon you'll break, just as I did, eaten alive by the guilt you tried to drown." Her spectral fingers finally brushed my cheek, and in that surreal moment, I felt the cold sting of her touch, a mirror of my own twisted guilt, as the mirror shattered into shards of glass that sliced through the fabric of my mind. Darkness flooded every corner of my vision, and her voice lingered like a ghostly echo long after her face dissolved into smoke. You made me eat glass, Elena, and now it's your turn to taste what's left of your soul. I was left trembling, haunted by the spectral visage and her relentless accusations, the line between reality and nightmare blurring until I wondered if I was losing myself forever. Trapped in an eternal hallucination of justice served too late, a punishment I had crafted with my own trembling hands. I couldn't bear to hear my own voice confessing everything. The cold, brutal truth that I had forced my sister into eating shards of glass until her life was snuffed out. The words echoed like a knife twisting in my skull, each syllable a reminder of my monstrous act. My hands trembled uncontrollably as I stared at the glowing screen of the camera, the evidence of my guilt staring back at me. Tears streamed down my face, but they felt like nothing. Just salty remnants of a conscience long shattered. I reached out with trembling fingers, fumbling for the power button, my breath hitching with every heartbeat pounding in my ears. No, I whispered desperately, trembling so violently I thought I might shatter myself. No, I won't let this be my legacy. The room was suffocating, shadows crawling along the walls like the specters of my guilt. My mind spun in chaos. Was this truth too unbearable to bear? Could I somehow erase the sound of my own voice, the confession that condemned me? I grabbed the device, my grip tight and frantic, as if holding onto it could keep the nightmare at bay. You'll never know, I hissed, voice cracking, eyes darting wildly as I brought the camera down with a deafening shatter. The screen cracked into a spiderweb of fractured glass, the pieces scattering across the floor like my shattered sense of self. I plunged my hand into the wreckage, smashing the device into pieces, each impact louder than the last, until the room was filled with the deafening echo of broken electronics and my ragged breathing. I stared at the debris, trembling, realizing that by destroying the evidence, I might have momentarily silenced my voice, but the guilt roared louder in my mind, echoing like a relentless storm that refused to die. In that instant, I believed, desperately, that erasing the confession would erase the truth, that by tearing apart the recordings, I could somehow sever the chains of my own torment. But deep inside, I knew better. I knew that some wounds, once inflicted, bleed in silence, long after the evidence is gone. As I sank to my knees, the shards of glass glittered like tiny knives, reflecting the fractured mirror of my conscience, and I realized that no matter how much I destroyed, the darkness within me would never truly be silenced. I stood before the cracked mirror, my reflection fractured into countless shards that mirrored my shattered soul. The dim light cast ghostly shadows across my face, emphasizing the hollow hollowness in my eyes. My trembling hands reached out, trembling so violently that the glass trembled with me, and I whispered, "It's all my fault. I made her eat glass, and I loved it." My voice cracked, breaking the fragile silence that had settled over the room like a thick fog. As if summoned by my own words, the reflection twisted. Lily's face appeared behind mine, eyes wide with pale horror, and I saw her bloody lips trembling as she tried to speak. I clenched my fists, feeling the rough edges of the mirror's frame biting into my palms, and I snapped. "No! You don't understand. I did it because I had to. It was her or me, and I chose her to pay for everything she took from me." Tears blurred my vision, but I kept staring, voice rising in a frantic crescendo. "Look at me. Look at what I've become. I've become the monster I always feared. I made her suffer, and I loved it. No, I needed it. I needed her to feel the pain I carried inside." My breath hitched as a ghostly whisper echoed from the mirror's depths. "You're just as guilty as she was." My eyes widened, and I reached out, fingertips trembling, barely brushing the cold glass. "I'm not innocent," I admitted aloud, voice quivering. "I'm a monster, plain and simple. I made my sister eat shards of glass because I was jealous, because I hated how she shined brighter than I ever could. And now I see her. Her blood-stained lips, her vacant stare, filling the mirror's reflection, whispering that I have finally owned my darkness. Yes, I've admitted it. I've shouted it into the void. That I made her die. I made her suffer. And part of me, some sick, twisted part, still wishes I could go back, undo everything. But I know I can't. This is who I am. The girl who broke her sister, who watched her bleed and loved her pain. The mirror holds my truth now, and as I stare into it, I realize that this fractured image, just like my conscience, can never truly be mended. I am both victim and villain, forever entwined in this grotesque reflection of my own darkness. And for the first time, I accept that I am irreparably broken, the monster I tried to hide, staring back at me with icy, unrepentant eyes. She retreated into the shadows of her own mind, seeking refuge in silence and solitude, desperately trying to drown out the relentless echoes of her guilt. Days blurred into nights as she sank deeper into a haze of numbness, her only companion the faint whisper of Lily's ghostly voice haunting the corners of her consciousness. Often she would sit alone in the dim glow of a single lamp, trembling as her reflection flickered on the cracked mirror, her eyes searching for some shred of redemption she knew she'd never find. Was it really worth it? She whispered into the empty room, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and remorse. Her hands clenched the fabric of her sweater, nails digging into her palms as if trying to anchor herself to reality. She had made the conscious decision to seek therapy, to unravel the tangled mess of her fractured emotions, though she doubted it could ever truly mend her broken soul. In those quiet moments she would sit on her bed, eyes fixed on the window where the moonlight cast ghostly shadows across the peeling paint. Her mind replayed Lily's innocent face, the blood that stained her lips, and the sickening sound of glass breaking beneath her fingers. "I'm sorry," she would murmur, voice cracking like fragile glass, trembling with the weight of unspoken regrets. Sometimes she would clutch a worn photograph of her and her sister, tears blurring the image, her fingers trembling as she traced Lily's smile, so pure, so unaware of the darkness that had consumed her. Yet, even in her retreat, her subconscious betrayed her. The faintest sensation of cold fingertips brushing her cheek, or the distant whispering echoes of her sister's voice, would send shivers down her spine. She knew she could never escape what she'd done, nor silence the relentless torment that lingered beneath her skin. Her world had shrunk to the size of her own haunted mind, where memories and nightmares collided, refusing to let her forget or forgive herself. The darkness inside her had become a prison, and she was painfully aware that the only way out was through facing the truth she had long kept buried. Yet each attempt to hide from her own reflection only amplified the shadows, making her feel more lost, more broken, as if she was sinking into an abyss from which she might never emerge. Helena sat motionless on the worn wooden floor of her dimly lit room, the faint glow of dawn seeping through cracked blinds, casting long, trembling shadows across her face. Her fingertips traced the jagged scar on her palm, a silent testament to the chaos she had unleashed. Her own sickening act of cruelty. A cold, unsettling calm washed over her. A strange sense of peace mingled with the gnawing guilt that always lurked beneath her skin, like a festering wound. She looked at the photograph of Lily, eyes half-lidded, lips frozen in that innocent smile now forever tarnished. "Was it really worth it?" she whispered, voice trembling as if speaking could somehow unravel the knot inside her chest. Her gaze drifted to the mirror across the room, where her reflection seemed distorted, as if warped by the shadows of her conscience. The faint sound of her own breathing echoed in the silence, punctuated only by the distant ghostly echoes of her sister's voice, soft, pleading, haunting, reverberating in her mind like a curse. She clenched her fists, trembling so violently her knuckles turned white, and with a bitter chuckle she whispered again, "It's done. I can't take it back." Her eyes flicked toward the window, where the pale light hinted at a new day. But her soul felt frozen in the aftermath of her confession, caught between a disturbing sense of liberation and the relentless weight of remorse. She recognized now that the darkness within her had become a prison, one she could never fully escape, no matter how much she wished to drown it in silence or denial. The truth was etched into her bones, and as she rose slowly to her feet, her steps unsteady, she realized that the only way forward was to confront the abyss she had created, even if it meant surrendering what little piece of peace she had managed to grasp. An unsettling silence that threatened to swallow her whole, whispering that in the end, darkness was always waiting just beneath the surface, ready to devour what remained of her fractured soul. As I sat there, trembling faintly, the chilling silence stretching between my words and the icy realization that my confession had finally spilled into the open, I looked into the dim reflection of my own eyes, haunted and hollow, and whispered softly, almost to myself, was I really remorseful, or just trying to hide what I truly am? The question hung in the stale air, heavy with the weight of my guilt and denial, as if the shadows behind me listened intently, waiting for my answer. My voice cracked, trembling with a mixture of despair and defiance. I did what I had to do. She deserved it, right? Or was it just another way to silence the voice inside that screams, I'm nothing, that I'm capable of the worst? I clenched my fists so tightly that my knuckles blanched, feeling the sharp sting of tension from years of repression, a physical reminder of how deep the darkness had rooted itself within me. I watched my reflection distort slightly in the dim light, my eyes flickering with a flicker of something sinister, something I refused to name aloud. Maybe I convinced myself it was justice, I continued, voice trembling but steady. But deep down, I know the truth. I enjoyed the power, the control, the pain I inflicted. That part of me, that never really died, did it? I pressed my palms against my knees, feeling the cold steel of the truth seep into my skin, and with a bitter laugh I muttered, perhaps I think I'm sorry, or maybe I just want to believe I am, because if I admit otherwise, that I'm still capable of this, then what am I? Who have I become? The words felt like shards of glass scraping the fragile veneer of my conscience, and I knew, with a sick certainty, that my real confession was still locked away in the deepest corners of my mind, hidden behind layers of shame, denial, and a haunting question that echoed louder than any scream. Is the remorse real, or am I just fooling myself? As the cold dawn seeped through the cracked window, I realized that the darkness I had tried to bury was never gone. It had merely been waiting, patient and insidious, for the moment I'd finally fall silent enough to listen, and that perhaps, in the end, I was simply hiding from the truth I'd always known, that beneath the veneer of remorse, I had become something far more terrifying than I ever dared to admit.